Hello, class. This is your professor, Dr. Brian Lippincott, and I'm going to show you a short little video about Carl Jung and his connection to Kant, Aristotle, and Nietzsche. How the interrelationship of the philosophers leads to a psychological philosophy of Carl Jung that is very important to our learning. I'm a professor of psychology at John F. Kennedy School of Psychology at National University, and I'm the author of Analytical Psychology and Family Systems, Neo-Jungian practice to help families find flow. So on with the video.
Welcome to the Advanced Doctoral Seminar in the History and Systems of Psychology. Today, we are looking under the hood of the human mind, analyzing the mechanics that ignite our deepest conflicts. I am Dr. Brian Lippincott. As a clinical psychologist, flow neuroscience coach, and academic, I've spent decades studying how to repair these internal engines when they inevitably break down.
In post-Jungian scholarship, researchers often isolate Carl Jung's theories. They dissect his work into separate competing factions, some claiming his ethics are strictly Kantian, others Nietzschean, or exclusively Christian. This splinters our understanding of his entire clinical framework. Giovanni Colacicchi resolves this fragmentation in his text Psychology as Ethics. He pulls these isolated philosophical camps back together into a single cohesive clinical model. Colacicchi's analysis shows that analytical psychology cannot be reduced to a neutral set of clinical tools. The process of individuation, of coming to selfhood, is an inherently moral enterprise. We see the stakes clearly in Erich Neumann's concept of the new ethic. From this perspective, a neurosis is not a random clinical glitch, it is a moral failure. It represents the self-division of the individual, where the conscious mind clings to a rigid ideal while the unconscious rebels. This diagram illustrates Jung's solution. Traditional morality acts like a tyrant. Jung counters with the democratic unconscious, requiring active cooperation between conscious reason and our amoral instincts. As the legal maxim states, the other side must be listened to. The unconscious requires a seat at the table. Healing a fractured psyche requires us to dismantle the totalitarian rule of the ego. The mind repairs itself only through a dynamic, responsible partnership with the unconscious. To understand how this partnership operates, we must construct the first pillar of Colacicchi's psychoethical model, Immanuel Kant's legacy of duty and autonomy. The baseline condition for a healthy mind is what Jung terms relative ego freedom. The ego originates from the unconscious self, yet it must continuously struggle to maintain its autonomy from the raw amoral power of that source. When the ego fails to maintain its boundaries, it experiences psychic inflation. The ego is either inundated and usurped by the unconscious, or it defensively tries to control it entirely. The system overloads. Kant insisted on the strict consciousness of duty. Jung takes this mechanical rule and turns it inward, shifting the demand to the active duty to the conscious. The ego's primary moral obligation is to be fiercely, painstakingly conscientious. Jung adapts Kant's maxim, ought implies can, directly into his framework. Whenever a patient experiences a sense of moral inferiority, that distress acts as a diagnostic indicator. It proves they possess the hidden capacity, the can, to assimilate that shadow component into consciousness. While Kant denied the existence of irresolvable moral conflicts, Jung places conflicts of duty at the absolute center of human development. When faced with a true dilemma, the patient must endure the tension of these opposing forces. If held long enough, the transcendent function generates a creative, symbolic solution directly from the unconscious. Therefore, the ultimate Kantian duty, in the consulting room, is not blind obedience to an external rule. It is the arduous, courageous task of remaining fiercely conscious while navigating unresolvable moral conflict. We must heed this Kantian framework with our second philosophical pillar, Friedrich Nietzsche's radical critique of morality. This chart outlines the sharp divide between traditional, collective morality, what Nietzsche categorized as the herd, and the self-legislating ethics of the individual. Jung aligns closely with Nietzsche here. Observing that strict adaptation to collective moral standards is psychologically suffocating. It levels down the personality and acts as a primary driver of neurosis. To break free, a person requires vital health. This is the absolute psychological strength and resilience needed to endure the irrational, instinctual, and often painful elements of one's own unique personality. This requires a clinical application of self-love. We must counter the defensive love of the neighbor, which patients frequently use as a respectable screen to repress their own shortcomings. The dark, dense, unconscious material making up the shadow cannot be ignored. It must be actively captured and utilized by the ego, rather than repressed or vented blindly outward. As Jung wrote in the Red Book, we keep good and evil close together. He warns against Nietzsche's desire to step entirely beyond good and evil. If you discard these concepts rather than holding them in a conscious tension, you lose your ethical anchor entirely. Clinical healing demands the unapologetic, vital health of the individual. You must possess the strength to confront your own darkness without being crushed by the weight of collective moral expectations. To safely regulate the power generated by Kantian duty and Nietzschean vitality, we add our final philosophical pillar, Aristotle's practical mechanics of character. Aristotle posits eudaimonia, flourishing, or the good life, as the ultimate human goal. In the consulting room, this maps directly to the Jungian goal of individuation. To achieve this state, Aristotle details the development of hexes, deep-seated habits of character. These habits map onto Jung's clinical concept of a psychological attitude, a structural disposition that dictates exactly how a patient perceives and responds to the world around them. The mechanism that builds this attitude is phronesis, practical or ethical wisdom. Phronesis acts as the intermediate will within the psyche. It provides the necessary bridge between a patient's abstract cognitive awareness of their problem and their actual ability to execute an ethical solution in reality. This dismantles Platonic moral intellectualism. Simply knowing what is good is never enough to make a person act rightly. The execution mechanism must be trained. Aristotle provides the necessary developmental gears. He supplies the practical wisdom required to execute the heavy, often terrifying demands of Kant and Nietzsche in daily clinical reality. Bringing these three philosophical pillars together reveals the complete operational model, Colacicchi's psychoethical typology. The pieces lock together, forming a unified engine block. This matrix maps Aristotle's states of character directly onto the developmental stages of Jungian psychoanalysis. Tracking the clinical journey, a patient enters analysis in mechanical breakdown, neurosis, and must progress systematically through these character states, aligning their internal gears to achieve integration. This model issues a severe warning for modern practitioners. Technical, surface-level symptom reduction patches will always fail to resolve deep neurotic splits, precisely because they ignore the moral dimension of the illness. To keep this engine running, the active, responsible ego must remain at the controls, driving the entire psychoethical process forward. It demands a return to the democratic unconscious. The psyche operates optimally only through a unified system of checks and balances, sustained by the individual's vital health.
Analytical psychology is a rigorous, unified ethical schema. In this framework, the clinical cure for a neurosis is identical to the moral achievement of wholeness.